As we round out this series of videos on long-term care, we want to take a couple minutes today and just explore some funding options for long-term care. So if you were to need to revisit any of those old videos that we've done, check them out. They've got some good information before we dive into some of this funding. All right, so Spencer, today we're going to start off just again with some of this understanding of long-term care. Again, you can go back and watch some of the old videos that we've done about this. However, the premise is long-term care is a wide swath of care need. So you can either just have in-home care that you need that your spouse gives you, all the way up to skilled nursing home facility care that you need in a facility. So step one is understanding that long-term care isn't the same for everybody. A lot of people will need it, but not everyone will. And so at the end of the day, we want to recognize that and say, when we think about funding long-term care, it's not going to be the same for everybody. So anything else you want to touch on just briefly before we dive in?
Well, there are certain types of clients that we also need to pay particular attention here. And one would be, say, a single individual or a widow or widower who really wants to stay at home and may need that extra level of care. So that would be one of the most expensive lines of care, would be 24/7, 365 days, having someone with them if there's family that's out of town. That's the most expensive side of things. Another, of course, would be if we have someone who doesn't have anyone in town that could take care of them and is at significant risk of, say, dementia or Alzheimer's based on family history, or may even be showing signs of that we need to do some extra planning there, because those are the most expensive paths for sure, whereas others, as we've articulated, there may be a very low risk. Statistically, again, only about 15% of people who are now turning 65 will need 2 years of nursing home care or more. So 1 in 7, 1 in 6 would be the likelihood there.
Yeah. Well, and then the other piece of that, like you were saying, women typically have longer needs than men, primarily because with a lot of the demographic that we work with, they are college educated and they have typically are going to have a longer lifespan. And women have a longer lifespan than men statistically. And so you extrapolate that out, women may need long-term care for up to 4 years on average. Again, this isn't in a facility, it's just the paid long-term care need. It's going to be extended for women. I'm not saying that men aren't going to need it. So for all the examples that we're going to use today, we're using cost of coverage for East Tennessee. And that's going to range from about $20,000 annually for adult daycare. So again, just like a 9 to 5 while a loved one is at work or just some extra help, would cost about $20,000 to over $90,000 for a private room in a skilled nursing home area. So costs are going to vary based on where you live in the country, but that's where we are in East Tennessee. So really, we want to think, again, we've covered this a few times, but really being proactive is going to be your best first step. So what is the plan that you want to take on? How much risk are you willing to put into that? And what does your lifestyle need to change or develop? So we're going to get into now just some funding options. So whether you need that $20,000 adult daycare or whether you need the $90,000 nursing home. So what's one of the first options we can look to?
Well, so one of the first pieces is insurance. And insurance is one of those that we always say, don't buy insurance that you don't need. I'll tell you right now, Bill Gates is not getting long-term care insurance because he doesn't need it. And there's a lot of clients that we serve who don't need long-term care insurance because they've built through Social Security or pension or savings a set of financial resources and a plan that doesn't warrant them paying for long-term care insurance, because, as we always say, insurance companies are good at one thing, and that's making money. So on average, they're going to make a little money on each of their clients. Some they're going to actually lose some money on, a very few number of clients, and some, many of their clients, the majority of their clients, will actually make some on. So we want to grapple with that. Now, as we think about that, the insurability of a client is an important consideration, because if we have someone who comes to us who is 74 years old and they've had some heart problems and they have some other medical challenges, they're probably not going to be insurable. If by contrast we have someone that is very healthy and is 56, then that person is much more insurable, probably at a much more competitive rate. But we still have to ask ourselves, is this going to be a wise decision to enter into this insurance? So the qualifications, again, as we've talked about in former videos, is you have to have either 2 activities of daily living that you would qualify for by not being able to perform these, or cognitive impairment. And some of the other things that you need to understand about the insurance landscape is that you'll have a benefit period. So this is typically not forever. You might have 3 years or 5 years or 7 years of benefit period that would be available to you. And as you might expect, the longer the benefit period, the more expensive the insurance typically. As you might imagine, anything beyond 5 years, you probably are statistically unlikely to need that. And so most policies will not go beyond 5 years, but you'll find some that do go to 7 years. There's a daily benefit amount. This amount typically will start at some number. It might be $100 a day, let's just say. And then that will be indexed upward over time. There is a cost of living adjustment or an inflation adjustment there, but that typically costs there too. And it typically costs, unfortunately, at a higher level. So, I don't understand how the math works here, but the insurance companies get away with it. They might go from $100 a day and at the start of that contract to $150 a day, but instead of the premium increasing from $1,000 to $1,500, instead the premium might increase from $1,000 to $2,000. So there's some fuzzy math going on here, if you ask me. But this is very, very typical for what we see in the insurance landscape. Finally, we have an elimination period that you also need to be aware of. So there's a lot of folks that if the elimination period, for instance, is 90 days or 6 months, they're not going to be paid, of course, during this period. And for some folks, that's all that they needed. They might only need long-term care for 3 months or 6 months at the very end of their lives. So that would mean that they're not able to tap into those benefits at all if they don't get through the elimination period. Talked a little bit about inflation coverage and such. And then the other thing that really to be focused on, and this is where we've got to have that life planning element come into play, is there are some policies that only cover, say, nursing home care. They don't do a very good job of covering in-home care. There are other policies that it's dollar for dollar. And whether it's in-home care or nursing care, there's some policies that are reimbursement policies. That is very typical, where if you spend $1, they will reimburse you $1. There are other policies that you just qualify for that long-term care and that benefit starts to come. So there are lots of different provisions, and you might imagine that the more favorable ones typically also cost you more in terms of the premiums up front. Those premiums, of course, can be paid monthly or quarterly or annually, depending on the policy type. There are some policies that have been sold in the past and may be available from time to time that you just pay a single premium, up front. So lots of different options that we have there as we look through these policies.
And one thing we would say is, if you're actually looking to buy this insurance, read the policy really carefully. Maybe choose 2 different policies that you think are similar. Line them up next to each other and say, okay, what are the differences? What are the pros and cons of each of these if you're really looking into this? Because again, like you were saying, if one is significantly more expensive on the front end, but it only has a 30-day waiting period, but the other one is a 90-day waiting period, well, maybe there's some benefit to one or the other for you. If you've got other savings, it may help to be able to do the 90-day waiting period if it's going to be a cheaper policy. So read all the details. It's going to be arduous, but it's really important to understand what you're actually getting.
And obviously for clients that we work with, we're reading through those different options with clients. This is not an area that we focus on pushing clients in any way towards long-term care insurance, but if clients do bring us policy options, then we'll read them and try to give good counsel on what direction might be most appropriate.
So Spencer, you want to walk us through some of the pros and cons of long-term care insurance?
Well, and we've talked about this a little bit in other videos, but one of the pros, of course, is that you have a benefit stream that helps to offset some of that expense. And so this can provide some financial protection if we have high level of costs and those costs continue to go up. Then it can provide a level of peace of mind as well that we've addressed this on some level. Sometimes it gives more choice for the types of facilities, if you have some income there and you're able to dictate where you would like to be. And then there's also some spousal protection. And I think this is the one that is probably most helpful to consider for our clients, is that if we have a surviving loved one, maybe they've got resources that will help be preserved for the remainder of their lifetime, because long-term care can be quite expensive. And if one spouse needed memory care or needed some significant help while the other spouse is still living but not able to provide all of that care, then that can deplete resources. So it can be a very important consideration. The other thing that I'd say on the con side of things is that there are a lot of different pieces to this, and it often stacks up against clients that we serve. So one of these would be that the cost of the premiums, as we've talked about before, we don't actually know what they're going to be over the next 10, 15, 20 years. We may start at a level that we say, okay, this is a really good deal. 5 years later, it could be double or triple that amount. So we don't have a level of certainty there that we really like in terms of the cost of those premiums. There are, of course, eligibility and health restrictions. That happens on the front end typically. And so, if we can get a client qualified for the insurance, then we have, at least we've gone past that hurdle. But there have been plenty of times when people thought that they would qualify. They go through the arduous past of the application, the physical exams, all those kinds of different things, and then they're turned down, which isn't a fun outcome either, because you've invested a number of hours typically and find, okay, I'm not eligible for this. We also think about the limited benefit period. So typically you would think about insurance as this solution if you have the worst of all scenarios happen. For instance, you insure your home against a fire, and if the worst thing happens, the home burns down, why, the insurance company pays you enough to make you whole for that home. Well, it's not the case with long-term care, because there is a benefit period. So it might be 3 years or 5 years. Well, there's circumstances where if you had a need of 12 or 15 years, you might go through all of the funds that you had. You might go through the entire insurance period and then also still move through all of your funds, where you're still at the end of life having no assets there. So if you're trying to pass resources on to that next generation or to your surviving spouse, sometimes that will not be enough there. And then it is one of these policies that it's a use it or lose it type of experience oftentimes. So you could pay in over the course of 25 years, and then you started the policy at age 63, you go to 88, you pass away at age 88 from some kind of an accident that happens that you never needed long-term care. Why? All of those premiums that you've paid in over all of that time, they're not coming back to you. So lots of different considerations in addition just to the complexity of the policy. Sometimes people will be able to move through the eligibility period, they'll qualify, but the reimbursement policy for some carriers is not an easy thing to navigate, and so it just becomes a significant frustration to the caregivers, to the loved ones that are trying to claim the benefits for our client.
All right, so if we're not going to use insurance, one of the other strategies that we can do is self-funding. So this requires that clients really save well during their lifetimes, which we understand isn't true for everybody. But for those that have saved well, how can we think about using long-term care, using retirement resources to fund long-term care needs?
Well, this really depends on how much a client is taking and using on a month-to-month or year-to-year basis. Because sometimes we'll find that if their normal budget and living and giving amounted to $100,000, and they moved into a memory care facility, that their expenses might be $100,000. It's just that they're not able to engage in the same activities and travel and gifting maybe that they would have been able to otherwise. So it really doesn't move the needle much in terms of the expense. Now, if we have a client that was planning on living on $3,000 a month, then it's a very different set of circumstances. But in this example, let's go through one here. Zeke's 75. He has Social Security benefits of $42,000 annually. His expenses are roughly $72,000 annually, and he has to withdraw about $30,000 a year to cover his base expenses. let's just say that he saved, well, he has $1 million in his IRA, another $500,000 in Roth, and keeps $200,000 in his bank account, and his RMD is about $40,000, this year. Well, if he lives in East Tennessee and he has that cost, again, that we've quoted, about $90,000 in a memory care unit or a private room nursing home care situation, then those assets that he saved, that $1.75 million, he has plenty of resources there to pull for the remainder of his life, unless he's invested only in Bitcoin or something crazy, like that really drives those assets up and down at a fast clip. So, in a circumstance like that, where we have someone that saved really well relative to their spending, even relative to their spending potentially in the long-term care arena, we're in good shape. The other way that sometimes we can see funding happen is via annuities with long-term care riders. This is something that not every long-term care or not every annuity, I should say, has some kind of a long-term care rider, but we do see this from time to time. You want to unpack some of that?
Yeah, so essentially what the annuity would say is that if you need long-term care and you are getting, often we see this with guaranteed income streams. So if you receive this income, then they'll say, okay, if you need long-term care, we'll double what you need. Now, again, you still have to go through the qualification process. Do you meet the 2 out of 6 activities of daily living that you can't do? Do you need memory care? There's still hoops that you have to jump through, but sometimes it makes a whole lot of sense, especially clients that are single, that may not have family in town. Then being able to double that income stream for 2, 3, 5 years is really beneficial. But again, that's not every annuity has it, and not every guaranteed fixed income annuity stream has it either. And so you really have to look and see, is it worth it to add that rider on as a potential additional amount of income for the cost that you pay for that annuity? So let's take an example. Harriet's got $40,000 of Social Security income. She's got an annuity that pays annually $25,000. And so her annuity has a rider that will pay twice the amount of the income that she receives if she goes into a long-term care facility. So this year she has an incident and cannot perform 2 of the 6 activities of daily living. And so that rider kicks in and it will double the amount of income that she receives this year. Again, if we go back to what the cost of private nursing home is in East Tennessee, it's about $90,000. So you take the $40,000 she has, you double the amount of income that she was receiving for that annuity. So it goes from $25,000 to $50,000. Now she's got $90,000 covered of income against $90,000 of that average cost. So she's covered for the next 5 years in terms of costs that are for that long-term care. Now, things could fluctuate up and down. We don't know where her costs are going to go, but it covers that baseline for Harriet.
Well, and that's something that can be quite helpful for clients because they know intuitively that if there's been big expenses ahead for them, it's probably going to be long-term care. For a lot of our clients, they say, hey, we live fairly simply in retirement. We take some trips here and there, but it's not as though they expect a 6-figure expense that comes out of the blue. The only one that will arise that is difficult to plan for is long-term care, and that doubling can help in those circumstances.
And like with everything, we have to weigh the benefit to risk. Does Harriet want to pay the additional amount for that annuity rider to be able to cover that long-term care? Some clients, it might make sense. It may not make sense for others, though.
A couple other things that we often get questions about that we want to highlight here. First, some tax implications. There are a lot of circumstances where if a client especially goes into a long-term care facility like a nursing home, oftentimes those expenses, if they're categorized in certain ways, can be itemized on their tax return. So oftentimes if we see a significant expense like $90,000 a year, we may find that most of that expense actually can be put to itemized deductions on the tax return, which would mean that if we're taking IRA distributions, we may have the bulk of those really covered by the itemized deductions there to make up for it. So that gives an opportunity for the family to look at tax planning because it may make sense to accelerate IRA distributions rather than use some of those non-qualified resources, which will receive a step up in cost basis at a person's passing given current tax law. The second thing that we often hear questions about is, well, should I be thinking about some kind of trust to put assets into so that the government can't take over them if I should need long-term care. And we see attorneys go in different directions here. There is a significant amount of skepticism, we think, among some attorneys that the courts, that the legislators won't just rewrite law to be able to get to those assets. Because at the end of the day, if you think about it, if you need long-term care help, if you give away, say, your property, or if you give away assets to your family and become penniless and make the government pay for you, why, that's not a great policy on the government standpoint. So they could, legislators could rewrite law to make those trusts much more difficult to defend going forward. So the idea, though, is you could put resources into a trust. You could put a home or other types of resources into a trust, push that onto family. There's typically a 5-year look back in most states, and Tennessee is one of those, where if you do that and then you need long-term care resources in the next 5 years, long-term care help, then you've got to pay for that yourself. If you don't, then the state will say, well, we have to be able to pull back some of those resources that you gave away here within these last 5 years. So there is a thought that we could put those resources into a trust prior to 5 years and maybe be able to defend that. What we would often come back to, though, is why not consider just passing on the property or passing on whatever it might be down to the next generation outside of trust. Now that gives them a level of latitude and control, but they're going to get that anyway. If you don't trust them to begin with, then we might have other issues about why you want to pass those on. But we look at these Medicaid trusts as something that may not be the best path, again, because we don't know where law may go from here. And we've had attorneys say that they're fairly skeptical of them being able to hold up long-term in court. Well, we hope that you found this video useful. We've gone through how you can fund long-term care. As we always say, we are not attorneys. We're not CPAs. So we've provided some opinions, but again, take this to your attorney, your legal professional to look at and to assess whether a trust or other options might be best for you. Same thing with your tax advisor. We are not CPAs. We're not giving specific tax or legal counsel on anything that we're saying here, but giving kind of a range of different opinions that we've seen among professionals that we work with. With that, hope you have a great week, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.
If you like these financial planning videos, please share with a friend, and if you have questions, go to our website at SiriusRetirement.com. This content was provided by Retirement Planning Services. We are located in Knoxville, Tennessee. You can visit our website at SiriusRetirement.com. The information in this recording is intended for general educational and informational purposes only, and should not be construed as investment advisory, financial planning, legal, tax, or other professional advice based on your specific situation. Please consult with your professional advisor before taking any action based on its contents. Advisory services offered through Retirement Planning Services, LLC.